Any embellishments that you are using, you want to make sure that these are around half the depth of the mould that you'll be using. So here I'm just demonstrating that the embellishments that I'll be using don't come up any higher than halfway up the side of the mould that I'm going to be using. Step 1. Make sure that the moulds are clean, dry, and prepare your working area ready for working with resin. Step 2. Mix your resin according to the instructions on the resin that you are using. Mine uses a ratio of 1:1, so that's equal parts of the resin to the hardener. So here I'm getting ready to work with my resin. Have the resin and the hardener, the cup that I'm going to be mixing it in, and I also want to protect my hands with some gloves. Step 3. Slowly mix the resin together for around 3 to 5 minutes. And working slowly is really important to avoid air bubbles being created. Now this is a sped up version of me mixing my resin, but you want to go really slowly to avoid any air bubbles being created. And you want to make sure that you scrape down the sides of your container and the bottom frequently in order to make sure that all of your epoxy resin and hardener is mixing and combining. Step 4. Allow your resin to sit for 1 to 2 minutes to allow any air bubbles to rise and pop. Step 4. Step 5. Slowly pour the resin into the mould and smooth out gently with your stirring stick if necessary. Step 6. Leave your resin to naturally level out and allow it to set slightly for around 30 minutes. Step 7. We're now gently going to place the embellishments onto our first layer of resin. Before placing your embellishments into your resin, it's wise to have a think about where you want to place them. You could lay them out next to your coaster mould to give you an idea of the position that you want to put them in. We don't want to move them around once they've gone into the resin, so have a think about this before you drop them in. I'm going to carefully place mine into the resin, being careful not to get my fingers in it too, and then allow them to sink gently. You don't need to touch them, they'll do that by themselves. Step 8. Now allow this first layer to dry for around 2 to 4 hours. Here you'll see that my embellishments have started to sink gently into the resin. Now we move on to step 9, and we'll be repeating steps 1 to 5 to create the second layer of resin. And for this layer, you can use any mica powders that you wish to at step 5. I've gently mixed my epoxy resin and the resin hardener together, and now I'm going to be adding my mica powder, and this is going to give some colour to the next layer of my coaster. And I've decided to go for this cool kind of bronze colour, which I think works really nicely with pumpkins. So once you've mixed your mica powder slowly and carefully into your resin, we're then going to pour this over our first layer within the mould and allow the resin to spread out over that first layer and the embellishments we added. So I'm happy that my mica powder is now well distributed through my resin and mixed in really nicely. I've let it settle for 1 to 2 minutes to allow any air bubbles to rise to the surface, just like we did on the first layer. Now I'm going to gently pour this resin into my mould on top of the first layer that's already there. And I'm going to allow it to spread out in its own time without moving it around, and it will naturally level out in the mould. Step 11. We're now going to leave this alone completely to cure for at least 24 hours. And you want to make sure that it's in a relatively warm and dry place. Step 12. We can now remove our coaster from the mould, turn it upside down, and allow it to cure for another 24 hours before using. Here, I'm gently removing my coaster from the mould. I'm peeling away the edges first, and at this stage you can just double check to make sure that it has dried and has hardened. If it's still a bit flexible, you might want to leave it to dry for a little bit more time. So then I can gently peel away the mould from my coaster and have a look at my creation. Here's my coaster all finished, and I'm really happy with how this came out.